center stage?
Yeah.
I'm a little nervous. Do you want it?
Oh, I'm okay.
We love London. It's such a beautiful city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't know so much.
He never found a microphone he didn't like.
Right. Built a data center in the Docks.
Oh, wow.
So I spent a lot of time there. Make a joke about the senator, Charles
That's one of our
Schumer.
newer railways.
Most famous place to be in the Senate was between him and the camera.
Do you know which area? Station or? Oh, yes, I think I know what you're talking about. Yes.
How do you deal with that baggage with like Robert Byrd?
Yeah.
But he came out of that, you know.
Had like the Thames and stuff in front of you, right?
Yeah,
Right
right on the top. Oh, he did. He always did. And he renounced all that. He did. Yeah. He was the longest serving senator.
Did you find it too small? 2.5 everything on it. Yeah. I mean, in terms of like house size and things like that. Yeah, roads are so tight. Yeah, everything's smaller. Yeah. Well, one thing I really like about it, roads are really wide and spacious and houses and everything. Oh wow. As in the zippers and then the light switches when opening the switches the other way. Everything was confusing, right? That's what I found really clear just when coming in. It's like he purposely did everything opposite to each other, you know?
And of course, the electrical circuits are different. Nothing that works there works here.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening for Community Over Politics. We are pleased to be partnering tonight with the Shepherdstown Ministerial Association, and this is the kickoff event for the Shepherdstown Ministerial Association's Week of Prayer and Worship. This event is also part of the Year of Civility here at Shepherd University. The Year of Civility is a collaboration between Shepherd University and the Stubblefield Institute, and it focuses on promoting civil discussion and action that brings together diverse ideas and addresses complex issues. My name is Ashley Hurst. I'm the director of the Stubblefield Institute for Civil Political Communications, and I'm pleased to be joined tonight by faith leaders and nonprofit leaders in our community. I'll introduce them in just a moment. As we inch closer and closer to the election, we hear more and more about the division that seems to be within our country. News media, social media, and paid advertising highlight these divisions relentlessly. Divisions over international affairs, domestic policies, whose side is right, whose side is wrong, and whose side are you on? But while this is playing out on the national and international stage, I'd like us to turn our attention to what is happening in our own backyard and have a different conversation. A conversation that recognizes and celebrates the ways that different groups, in tonight's case, different faith traditions, work together every day to meet the needs of our community. For purposes of this discussion, when I use the word community, I'm referring to those who live in geographic proximity to one another. I know the word community can recognize groups bound by shared and non-geographic commonalities, but for the sake of tonight's discussion, we do want to focus on how groups within the same geographic place can work together to meet each other's needs. Joining me for tonight's discussion, and I'm starting with the person furthest from me, is Mr. Keith Lowry, Executive Director of Jefferson County Community Ministries. To his left is Imam Nazir Faruqi from the Islamic Society of Western Maryland. Next we have Rabbi Mark Perman from the Congregation B'nai Abraham. Next to Rabbi Perman is Father Andy Switzer from St. Agnes Catholic Church, and they will introduce themselves further in just a moment. Before we begin, I would like us to take a moment of silence to recognize the heaviness of what is not only happening on the world stage, but also the challenges that are faced by many in our country who are impacted by violent divisions. At the end of the moment of silence, we will continue with our panel discussion. Peace. Now moving into tonight's discussion. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Mr. Lowry, who will not only introduce themselves, but will also introduce you to Jefferson County Community Ministries. And then each of our faith leaders will take a turn sharing not only information about themselves, but also sharing how their faith traditions call them to live in community with their neighbors, both those who share their faith traditions, those of differing or no faith traditions. Mr. Lowry.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for attending. Jefferson County Community Ministries is a 42-year-old institution that has been here for 42 years. That's easy math. But we are a faith-based, community-focused organization. When I say faith-based, we're sponsored by about 40 different churches and faith-based groups. And what's fascinating is that we have all agreed to put aside our individual beliefs for the purposes and the goal of serving those in need within our community. And I think it works very well for what we do. We don't ask people when they come through, do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? What are your beliefs? What are your situation in life? We don't ask where they're from. We don't ask, in fact, it's interesting because when we go to apply for a grant, they will ask us what's the percentage population of this or that or minorities. Well, we don't keep records of that. We just, when people walk through the door, we just said, how can we help you? And it works very well from our community. I will just tell you that this last year, we had over 4,500 clients walk through our door to ask for assistance. And we have about 1,800 families. And if you look at the percentage of population in our county, that's about 9% of the population of the families in our county who are in dire need and need assistance. And when I say 40 faith-based groups, in fact, populations of the Muslim community from as far away as Leesburg and as far away as Washington, D.C. have helped us. And we have every faith imaginable that comes to work and volunteer. We have over 150 volunteers, and so I'll just put that out there. If you want to volunteer, it's a great place to volunteer. But we also have full-time staff. And our whole goal is to take somebody when they come through, wrap our arms around them, and say, what can we do to make you whole so that you become self-reliant once again? And that's what we do. And we have a great staff that works that way, to include medical care, mental health care, psychiatric care. We have day programs to help people find jobs. We have a shelter that just last year, emergency shelter, is now open year-round. And that is fantastic news, because people who are in need of shelter need it just as much in 100-degree weather as they do when it's 10 degrees outside. So that's what we do. That's who we are. We have huge success stories that we work with. About 2 to 3 people a month we find a permanent job, and about 2 to 3 people a month we find permanent housing for. And that's a really hard thing to do, but when you have that many clients coming in, we also make sure that our staff is taken care of, because it taxes them to do that kind of work on a constant basis. I believe that's about all to say for right now.
All right, thank you. Imam Faluki.
Okay, it's working. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. I'll start off by saying Assalamu alaikum, the greeting of the Muslims, which means peace be upon you. And I've been asked to introduce myself. I'm not someone very interesting, so I will just say that I was born in India. I was brought up in the UK, in London. I worked in Dubai, then I moved to US, States. I've been in Boston for about a year, and now I'm in Maryland for about a year now. So just been moving around, hopping around. As I was telling the guys here, that to become an imam was not something that I initially wanted to do. It's just my mom made me do it, you know. So I was in high school at the time. She wanted me to stay out of trouble, so she said, you go to the mosque in the evening classes. So they had a program on, you know, training for imam. And so I started, I liked it, and I continued, you know. So that's how I'm here. Talking about interfaith work between communities, I thought a lot about what's the best example that I can give. And for us as Muslims, everything of our religion revolves around the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so in his life is divided into two major sections for Muslims. The first part of his life is what we call the Meccan period, where he was in Mecca. And in Mecca, the Muslims were under persecution, they were the minority, etc. But after an event called the migration happened, and he left Mecca and he moved to another city called Medina. And in Medina, they became the majority, they established social laws and etc., etc. So when he came to Medina, a large population of Medina had already become Muslim before the coming of the Prophet Muhammad. So from here, we find and we see how the Prophet dealt with interfaith. Majority of his neighbors at that time were the Jewish faith. And so the interesting thing that I want to share with you today is the Prophet Muhammad comes to Madinatul Munawwara. Munawwara means the enlightened city. So he comes to Medina and he sees everybody around him. And he's just arrived in Medina, and everybody's crowding around him. The Muslims at that time, they've not seen him. The first time they're laying eyes on him, there was no WhatsApp or, you know, internet or anything, so they didn't know what he looked like. So they come, they're seeing him, so everybody is excited to meet the Prophet. And so everyone's saying to him, come to my house, stay at my house until you find your own place to build a house. So he said, you know what? I'm not worried about building my house. He says, there's three things that I want to do. I want to lay the foundations of this community. The first three things that he did, even before looking for his own plot of land, his own house. Number one, he says that the people that I have come and that are coming with me and that are going to come later, they're the immigrants. And sometimes immigrants are not looked upon favorably. You know, they come to the community, people think, oh, they're taking our jobs, they're taking this and that. So he said, the first thing I want to do is I want to make brotherhood between a resident and an immigrant. So the resident and the immigrant, they were paired up, and they were told that you have to help this immigrant brother, and in return, he will also help you. So it was like a partnership that they had. And so the residents, some of them, they took this so wholeheartedly. Just on a light note, they said, one of them, when he was assigned a brother to take with him, he said, look, this is all of my wealth. I have 2 properties, I have this wealth, etc. 1 property is yours, half of my wealth is yours. I have 2 wives, one of them is yours if you want. So he was, you know, wholeheartedly, they were willing to share everything. So there was no animosity or enmity between the immigrants and the people that were living there in Medina. That was step number 1. Step number 2, he said, the very first thing I want to do is I want to make a peace treaty with everybody that's living here locally. So I don't want to fight. I don't want any wars. We're just coming from persecution. We know how that feels like. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get all the leaders together and say, we are going to work united as one, and we're not going to fight within each other, and we're not going to help anybody. If somebody attacks us, you're not going to assist them. And if somebody attacks you, we're not going to assist them. In fact, we're going to come to your aid and defense, and we're going to become a community like one. This was the second thing. And the third thing he did was set up what we call a community center. The first thing he did, the very first thing he said, he found a plot of land which was empty, which is now where the mosque is built currently, and he said this is going to be the very first community center. And from here, projects like feeding the poor, right, which we'll talk about later, I'll discuss this in more detail, and housing the homeless, etc., where people would come to stay, etc. So he first set up this community center, and this was the very first 3 things he did because he wanted to lay the foundation of a unified community. And this is something, the effects of which ripple down through history. And we see this, just to mention 2 incidents. I know I'm limited by time. Just 2 incidents. Number 1 was the conquest of Aqsa by one of his Khalifa, his Caliphs, Umar, right? Radiallahu, may Allah be pleased with him. When he came to, and when they conquered, the conquest took place of Aqsa, we found that there were no Jewish community in Aqsa. So what did he do? He made a specific quarters called the Jewish quarters, and he said, you know, you weren't allowed for so many years, you weren't allowed in Aqsa. I want you to come back and live within the community because we want a unified community. So the Christians had their quarters, the Muslims had their quarters, and the Jewish faith people, everybody had their own quarters because he wanted a unified community, because obviously if he didn't let them in, sooner or later it's holy land for them. They would want to come back as well. So he said unity, if we live united together, then there's less chance of fighting. So he introduced this. Similarly with Salahuddin, right? When he conquest of Aqsa occurred, even though there was so much fighting and crusades and slaughter, he came in and said, I forgive everybody. Everybody come inside, we'll live together, you know. So this is kind of the teachings that the Prophet Muhammad had, that live together as a community wholeheartedly. The more unified you are as a community, the stronger that you will be together. So there was just a few things, just how Islam as a religion encourages unity between the faiths. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi Perman?
That. Very good. I'm Mark Perman. I am originally from Brooklyn, New York, and then moved to Manhattan. Anybody here from Brooklyn? Nobody? I'm leaving. So I was originally in the performing arts world, and then when I was in my 20s, my father passed away, and I started getting involved in a synagogue on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which was very dynamic and very participatory, very social action-oriented. Up till then, I was what you might call a secular, disenfranchised, disconnected Jew. So it was that experience of seeing that Judaism could be alive spiritually, that we were involved in communal efforts, and at that time, it was the 80s, and AIDS was really bad on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Is that for me? Jeez. So, you know, we became very involved in that, and I started to be in the choirs and so forth. And actually, it was my mother who suggested to me, you know, you're an actor, you're a singer, and now you have this connection to Judaism, which is not just cultural anymore, but it's spiritual. So do you, have you thought about being a cantor, which is the Jewish musical sort of rabbinic, I don't like to say associate, but rabbinic, cantorial, musical part of being the rabbi? And I said, well, yeah, I need a career, and that will pay me well, and why not? So I felt that calling. But, you know, obviously we had to have it deeper than that, right? Because we couldn't sustain it with just our mothers telling us, right? So I went off to Israel and studied to become a cantor at the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, and then spent 3 years in New York and had different congregations. Then I got rabbinic ordination in 2013, independently from a place called Mesivta, and Cumberland, Maryland, back in 2016 was my first chance to do rabbinic and cantorial roles together. So I'm the music, spiritual leader, teacher, bar mitzvah, the whole business, and I get only one salary for doing both. Is that right? No. So Judaism, it's both universalistic and particularistic. So as Jews, we're concerned about Jewish tradition, observance, Jewish law, enhancing the Jewish community, building it up, making sure it's alive and vibrant and, you know, spiritual. But it's also very much has the universalistic component. So we are very much committed to the community as well and to the larger purpose. We say we are all made in B'Tselem Elohim, which is in the image of God. And there are 613 Jewish mitzvot or commandments. Obviously, we don't follow all of them. Even the Orthodox can't follow all of them. And some of them are not even relatable. But some, like hospitality, welcoming the stranger, visiting the sick, comforting the bereaved, rejoicing with bride and groom. These are all some of the more universal mitzvot. And, you know, a little bit later we'll talk, I guess, about some of the community things we do in Hagerstown, where we cooperate with Christian and Muslim and so forth. But, and you know, within the denominations, the more orthodox, quote unquote, the more, I don't like the term religious, more orthodox will tend to be a little bit more insular. And as you move across the spectrum to the more liberal movements, like the Reform movement, we're generally more active in the larger community as a whole. So it really depends. We say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. It's an joke.
Thank you. Father Switzer?
Yes, I'm Father Andy. There's a theme here of mothers, yeah. like the imam, my mom got me involved in church to keep me out of trouble, but no, no, not quite. Good trouble now, hopefully. But family roots, too. Mom and dad had a huge influence on me. I think of my mom, who was protesting the Vietnam War while she was watching her brothers go off to war, and certainly supportive of them. So the peace side of sort of my faith background comes from my mom. On the other end, my dad is now a retired coal miner, And I watched him labor organize at a young age, so the peace and justice. And when I got to seminary and started studying theology, I was like, wow, I experienced some of this firsthand from my mom and dad. But seeing a church growing up that really engaged the larger community was really a huge impact on my call. I've been a pastor here at St. Agnes now. It'll be 5 years in July. So I came in the middle of the pandemic, not the greatest time in the world, but the community was certainly supportive. And, you know, just the commitment here to ecumenism, interreligious dialogue in Shepherdstown. For myself, I think, though, back to my study days, I studied at St. Mary's Seminary in Baltimore. And it was a seminary that was committed to ecumenism and interreligious dialogue. But I was telling, with all of us, we had dinner before we came here. And I said, this is, as we're coming into election time, the first Roman Catholic president was John F. Kennedy. And at that time, there were those that were afraid that would the Pope take over the country. And at the same time, in the 1960s, we had what was known as the Second Vatican Council, and which really drew on our 2,000-year tradition. So during that time, what really is important was, we can look back over history, and we can see some really tragic things with the wars of religion, like the Crusades, the Reformation, where followers of Jesus were kind of killing each other. We can look back at that history. But at the Council, Vatican II, the church really drew from the best of its tradition, right? Like, part of wisdom is to look at experience and what was best over really the centuries of our faith. And so, like, it's not a side thing for me as a Roman Catholic priest. It's not something that's optional to be ecumenical, work with other churches. It's not optional for me to be interreligious as a pastor. This is part of who we are. That's why when Pope Francis goes to Israel, Palestine, he's there with a rabbi and an imam. That these and to me, that's the value of witness, right? So, but unfortunately, sometimes in my own church, I don't think it's worked itself locally. This is why this is important, that we're here together, and that it's all about working for the common good, to hold what's sacred and important to us. And so, just being in this with the group tonight, learning. Just give this as an example. When I was in seminaries, the things that kind of influence you, being a place that was ecumenism and interreligious, there were no crosses in our classroom. There was sacred spaces for crosses, but that space was to be honored in such a way that dialogue could happen, that we could respect each other. But I think those things have had an influence on me. If we think of the Pope, if he goes to a mosque or a synagogue, I think to myself, take off my shoes, I'm on holy ground. I'm entering into this sacred space to learn here. It's one of the reasons, looking out, there's been a lot of people that helped to make this event happen. But even here, the Ministerial Association, when we were doing some events together, well, if we're going into, for example, the Episcopal Church, I want to experience the Episcopal tradition or the Presbyterian or the Methodist, and the list could go on, but take off my shoes as a Roman Catholic. I'm on holy ground. What can I learn from this tradition that expands my view of God? So that's my approach to kind of interreligious dialogue and unity among the other churches too.
Thank you, Father Switzer. So both Imam Faruqi and Rabbi Perman, you both referenced work that you've done together. Both of your congregations are in Hagerstown. Can you expand upon that?
Well, I'm the vice president of HARC, which is the Hagerstown Area Religious Council. And Imam are you on the board? Or no, okay, a part of the community, and he's more recent. I came about 3 years ago, and they got me involved, and I was on the board. The next minute I know I'm vice president. And not because I was so good, nobody wanted it. I kind of moved up. So but when I was in Cumberland prior for 5 years, 3 years, I forget. There was nothing that organized or that structured. I mean, HARC is really an incredible thing, and if you go online and look about it, see what they do. So we are involved. We're doing a interfaith Thanksgiving service coming up, and we'll be very much connected together with the Christian churches and with your group and so forth. HARC has a concept that I had not heard of before called a progressive dinner. You've heard of that? I didn't really know what that was. I thought it was for liberal people, progressives, to go have dinner. But I didn't realize you go from the synagogue, and we had like matzo ball soup, and we had, we gave them little Jewish delicacies. Then we would go to a church and have a main dish. And you'll have to explain that why the mosque is like, you guys are experts on desserts, because it's been the second year in a row we go there for desserts. And, despite whatever you might hear, I mean, the cooperation and the sense of respect, I mean, I'm sure we all have our differences and so forth, but we respect each other's faiths. And, I think there is something about being in the same community that's not quite the same as being in a polarized environment like the Middle East that makes it somewhat easier to relate to each other and our faiths and our common heritage, because we're all part of the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam and so forth. So we share those values. We have like I'll give you an example. Oh, about our cooperation? Okay, so, you had an event at your mosque. You want to tell them about that? And tell them about that. Yeah.
Thanks. I thought you were going to say everything. Leave me with nothing to say. I joined the Hagerstown community about a year ago, and since then we've had a few events, to celebrate our unity together. So the council he's talking about, HARC, is Hagerstown Area Religious Council. So it has all the different faith denominations come together for different events throughout the year. One of them being the Progressive Dinner. We also had like a panel discussion like this between us. We talked about different topics like extremism within religion, how to deal with that within each person's religion and things like this. We've had talks about peace and what does your own religion say about peace and things like this. We also planning to have an open house very soon. We're working with HARC to have an open mosque where anyone can come and visit and see what a mosque is like, what's the daily activities and things like this. And so we've done a few projects together, which I think has brought us closer together, understanding of each other's faith and things like this. Like you said, the polarization is not there anymore. The alienation, it's not such a us and them concept anymore. And now there's a lot more understanding that's happening.
The last thing is we have, I don't know if you've experienced that yet, the Synagogue Houses of Worship tour in December. So people go around to different churches and synagogues, and they visit us, and I guess they visit you, and we just kind of give them the overview and give them a tour and so forth. And it's like right around Christmas time. So it's a nice thing.
That's wonderful. And Mr. Lowry, I did see that as you were coming in and all of our pastor friends were coming in, you were talking to them. And I know you mentioned to Father Switzer that his congregation supports Jefferson County Community Ministries. So can you talk a little bit about, and maybe Father Switzer, you can jump in, how you see the Shepherdstown area churches working together to meet the needs in our community?
Sure. Thank you. Before I do that, I've got to talk about my mother because everybody else did.
What is this? What is this, therapy?
Yeah. Is Dr. Phil here? Yes. So my mother has nothing to do with me being here, but my wife does. And she's sitting right there. So I was comfortably retired when they came and knocked on my door and said, would you please come and consider being the director of Jefferson County Community Ministries? And I looked at Janet and she said, yes, you will. So I said, okay. And I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I look at this as kind of a missionary experience for me, because I go around and I'm asked to go to different congregations to deliver messages to them about what it is we're doing and how we do things. And so I've been to the United Methodist Church a couple of times. I've been to a Baptist church. I've been to a Catholic church. I have a funny story that I'll tell about St. James Catholic Church. But what's exciting to me is that this community is so large and everybody is so welcoming that it doesn't matter what faith you're from. We all have the same focus to help others. And that's what this is all about. Now I have to tell the story because it's funny. Janet, not my wife, and I went to, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, St. James Catholic Church was, in conjunction with Shepherd University Orchestra, was putting on the Messiah concert. And so we went because we wanted to go hear it, and it's a beautiful facility, and we were in there, and all of a sudden this woman comes up and she says, "Can you sing?" And I said, "Yes, I can." And she said, "Do you sing baritone?" And I said, "Yes, that's what I sing." And she said, "Well, we're short of baritones in the choir. Would you please join the choir and sing the Messiah with us?" And I went, "Okay." So I went and we sang, and we had a great time. And afterwards, she comes up to me. She says, "Well, thank you very much, Father." And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not a priest." And she was really embarrassed. Well, it happened to be Deacon Dave's wife. And we've always had this bond since then that I can, and Deacon Dave is now one of my best buddies. We can call, we talk with each other. And Father Grassi, it's the community is just great. And I think that's what's important, is especially in Shepherdstown, there are several congregations here that help us immensely. And it's wonderful to be able to go to all these different locations and feel of the Spirit of the Lord as it pours out upon the different people. And just thank you.
Did you sing the Messiah without rehearsal? You just sight-read the Messiah? Did you sing it well?
Well, I tried. We had the foresight to buy a copy from the church as we were walking in, so at least I had the script to be able to sing from. But I'd sung it several times. But nonetheless, it was like, okay.
Father Switzer, can you give an example of how St. Agnes participates in the community?
Yeah, I think it's how we see ourselves. One image that we've used that actually came from Pope Francis is enlarge the tent. And it was interesting. I'm looking out at Pastor Karen. At one point, we had a funeral for someone that right in on our church property in a tent, and because she was Lutheran, Karen did the funeral. But it was interesting. I didn't plan that, but it became an image of enlarging the tent. And so moving out to the other churches. So for me, when I was assigned here, I was assigned to a territory. We call it a juridical territory. So, and the way of thinking that I'm not just here as a pastor for Catholics, I'm here for the larger community, and how do we build a better community? And I won't speak for all the pastors, but I see that attitude. We want to work together to make our community a better place. And so, like Shepherdstown Shares and the different churches that support that, to our brothers and sisters in needs. And the list could go on and on. Just recently, looking at Augusti for the pastor of the Presbyterian Church, she was really, their church was doing some work with immigration. And we were just sort of getting started, and we formed that relationship because we're on the same team. And how do we use each other's resources and gifts? Tonight, it took a lot of planning for tonight to happen. And even as I think we were doing a lot with churches, but there was a lot of discussion too about we need to branch out more, enlarge the tent, interreligious, and what are we doing there. Just as a pastor, and I'm sure leaders, maybe you can relate to this, there's a lot of, it's like we started a community garden at our church, and it's a really kind of a parable for me because it's really how a lot of things happen. You plant the seeds, you water, it takes patience, but a lot of times there's a lot of hours of discussion and relationships and coffee with each other that make a night like tonight happen. So I think it's got to be for myself, and I think our community, I think St. Agnes does a good job of this, and the larger area of how do we make this more of a way of life, a commitment of how we be who we are here.
Thank you. And we're going to move into a little bit more of a serious question. So right now, our country feels and our world feels very divided. Religious conflict dominates the news cycle alongside attack acts from political candidates who are pushing us to choose sides during an election that has been framed in moralistic terms. How should these external forces affect the way that we treat each other in our geographic community?
No, go ahead. Can you repeat that question?
Absolutely. How should external forces affect the way that we treat others in our geographic community?
Well, I think we have to be able to separate out what we see that's focusing on division and, perpetuating us against them in order to win elections, and be mature enough to see that that's not really a measure of who we are or who we can be, that people do have political viewpoints, but I have heard of divisions within families. I know about people unfriending each other and all this kind of division. It's unfortunate. I'm on Facebook when I'm not being a rabbi. I have a moderates group, and I try to have people of different points of view kind of come together and see if they can speak civilly. And it happens sometimes, but not a lot of times. So, like within my congregation, we have some people with very different, strong political points of view. I try to keep that overtly really out of the services or anything that I'm doing. For example, Friday night is the last service before the election, and I was thinking, how should I approach it? And I decided I'm going to do some kind of a prayer for the election, for peaceful transition of power, whatever it is, for people accepting the results and so forth. So I think we have to counter that message of negativity and of divisiveness, and because I won't tell you who I worked for. I was in broadcasting for a while, and I worked years ago for ABC Radio and a few of those places. All right, I'll tell you. Before I was in the religious world, I worked at ABC Broadcasting, and I worked there when they brought in Rush Limbaugh. So, sorry, don't hold it against me. I just worked behind the scenes, and I got to know him as a person, and it was before he got really crazy, and I knew the whole team. And a lot of what they do is really intended to fire people up and to get ratings. It's all about the ratings, really. And you're being manipulated in order to kind of be pulled into that, so you can then, make them more money and so forth. So I think we have to take a step back and just see each other as human beings who have different points of view and respect that. And that's not easy to do, but that should be what we try to do.
Can I add to that? I think the main thing here is to build tolerance amongst each other for difference of opinion. Something which is unique, I find, about the Islamic faith is regardless of the opinion or the school of thought that you follow, the mosque that you attend is the same, right? So I have congregants behind me that pray behind me that may not necessarily agree with every opinion that I hold, even religiously, right? So they don't hold the same religious opinion that I do. They may even pray slightly different to me, right? The method of prayer is slightly different. But when it comes to prayer, we're taught you stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and you pray behind one leader. So it's just that you have to understand difference of opinion is natural within human beings. This is how we are. We're not going to agree on everything. There's never going to be like an ideal utopian world where everybody agrees to the same thing. That's not going to happen. So what we have to learn to do is we have to learn to respect other people's opinions. and not be polarized based on our own opinion. And unfortunately nowadays, the technology and stuff that's out there, it doesn't help. Right? I know we were holding a class for the youth, and something we do have to teach them is that, you know, the AI that's now used in computers and YouTube and, you know, Instagram, etc., they will only generate for you and show you the videos of the side that you're interested of, whatever if it's politics or whatever, right? So if you're following one particular party, you will only get pro that party videos. You will not get the other opinion on your feeds and things like this. So it generally tends to polarize, and we have to teach people, look, respect other people's opinion. You may not agree with their opinion, but respect their difference of opinion. And so by doing this, you create a world where you respect each other, you accept the tolerance, as the saying goes, agree to disagree, and we can have live respectfully. But when it goes too far and we try to push our ideology, our sort of opinions on other people, that's where conflicts start to happen. So this is something that we need to be aware of, I think.
And we look at it from JCCM standpoint of view, we look at it a little bit differently, because we're faith-based, but I've instituted a couple of things that are really important. Number one, if somebody comes in and wants to talk about politics, we just don't talk about it, because that's not what we're there for. Our goal is to serve people in need. And so that's what I want everybody to wear when they come in with their hat, to say, look, regardless of what our backgrounds are, our focus is on this client who just walked through the door that doesn't have a place to sleep tonight. And how can we help them? And I think from that perspective, it's been very successful, because people realize that what we're doing is beyond where we came from. It's about helping people get to where they need to be. And the second thing that we instituted was we have a pastoral advisor. And so twice a week, we have pastors from every faith and religion that come through, and they just sit down and listen to people's talk. They don't preach. They don't say, you have to follow my beliefs. They just listen, and they become the person that somebody can trust. And that's what we're trying to do with our clients, is build that trust, that we're not there to try to convert them to anything, but we're there to provide them help. And if I translate that into a Christian model, we are Christ's hand. And that's all we're doing. We're there to represent him and serve the people as he would serve.
Maybe I'll just add that we get it. Oh, I'm sorry. You got it. All right, one second. We get into trouble when sometimes there are people in all of our faiths who claim to speak for religious truth and then connect a candidate to that. And if you are going to follow our faith, you need to follow this candidate, or else you're against Jesus, or you're against Muhammad, whatever you want to call it. And I think those people we all have to be wary of, who sort of connect themselves to a certain political ideology and then exploit that for the purpose of having people follow their political point of view. So I think that's a thing we have to watch out for.
I agree. I think that's a very important point, and kind of goes back to my first statements, is Christianity, just speaking for Roman Catholic or Christianity, when we impose our beliefs upon others, that can be dangerous. And I'm pretty concerned about a theology of resentment, right, with some of the language that we hear towards immigrants, towards different minorities. The list could go on and on. You think about it, some years ago, a signal went off to me that we really needed to take a look and look in where things have gone. But I heard more than one person comment that political correctness has went too far. That's very dangerous for our country. As a person of belief, words are sacred, and how we use words are sacred in a way that builds dialogue, that builds unity, that we can respect difference. And I think every culture needs referees that call things out when they're not. One of the things I've learned from my black brothers and sisters is when you see something that's wrong and said that's inappropriate, speak up, what was said in Madison Square Garden about Puerto Ricans. That's discriminatory. Now, it may come from a church that's nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean we don't engage and be a cultural referee to say, no, that's not appropriate. We live in a pluralistic society where there are certain values that make that happen, that we respect each other from different beliefs, from different backgrounds, from different cultures. These are, in some ways, they're shared values that we agree upon that are necessary, that we need to be aware of, irregardless of what or how we vote.
Thank you. So I think all of you addressed to a certain extent some of the divisions that have been arising not only within our communities but also within our churches. And so my background is as a United Methodist, and the United Methodist Church has recently experienced a division that has been painful for our church. And so what advice do you give to communities of faith who maybe are now separating but still in the same community and are trying to learn to work together once again but still have those hurt feelings between them? Correct.
Right. Well, I mean, in the Jewish world, you have the more orthodox point of view. They're going to be less liberal on issues like female clergy or LGBTQ and so forth. So we have our different denominations. Conservative is more moderate, sort of leaning more liberal now. Reform is the most liberal. Then there's Reconstructionist. So in general, I mean, within the Jewish world, we sort of understand that there are different points of view, and we sort of respect each other. And when it comes to issues that involve Israel or larger Jewish community issues, generally we come together, although there's many differences. There's many differences about Israel, most definitely. So we have our divisions, but I think most of us can look at those who become very extreme. For example, in the Middle East, if you have your settler community that persecutes Palestinians and so forth, most of us can reject that and say that that's not Jewish, no matter how religious you call yourself, But I think we respect, in the liberal world, we're more accepting, for example, of gay marriage. In the Orthodox world, they would not do that, although they understand that it's, they have respect for people who are gay and lesbian and so forth. So, I mean, but these divisions, it's not like it's just happened, where they fragmented. So we have our different denominations. We can come together and respect each other, but, someone might say, I don't know what they're talking about and why they're doing that, and I don't agree with them. But and then there are people who sort of gravitate between the denominations and kind of find their ways, but I don't know. But you guys must be going through a lot because you're like a family that's sort of fragmenting, and that's got to be hard for you. You should talk about that.
It's extremely challenging, but Mr. Lowry, I think you had something to say.
If you please, I invite you to come to our office, and if you come into my little cubicle, there's one major picture that I have on the wall, and it kind of represents my feeling about this topic, and that is, it's Christ, and he's feeding a little lamb at his feet. And the caption on the painting is, "Lost no more." And so what it portrays is that it doesn't matter where the sheep came from. It doesn't matter what problem sets they have. The lost sheep has been found, and they're under the protection of the Savior. And I translate that into the same world that we all live in, that as we're trying to help people, it isn't about who we are, it's about the lost person and how can we help them get back on their feet. And I think that tells a bigger story. And so when someone walks through our door that says, I'll just say this, there's pros and cons about the solar panel farms. And I'm not taking a position on that. But the electrical company gave us a donation to help us feed hungry people. And I got an angry letter from a person who said, you accepted money from somebody to help the poor, and because you accepted it from a company that I've been fighting for 2 years, I'm not going to donate to you anymore. And I wrote back and I said, I really appreciate everything that you've done, but my focus is not on the politics of what's going on in this community. My focus is on healing the sick and feeding the poor and helping homeless get a house. And I said, and I'm sorry that you feel that this has gone beyond what you're capable of enduring. I said, but I invite you to change your focus to be on the client who's in need, not on your political feelings. And that's kind of the way that we do things at JCCM.
Just going to answer again this from a faith perspective. Any denomination that breaks down, it's very emotional, it's very hurtful, and the people that then have to choose sides, they become quite deeply rooted, and they're very opinionated and things like this. So it can get very messy when this sort of stuff happens and this split happens. But the main thing that I would like advise to remember is that the ultimate goal is to connect to the Creator. Right? If you're going through this mean or if you're going through that denomination, as long as you're connecting back to your Creator, that should be our objective as a faith-based sort of a community or a group. So as long as the other party is doing that and you're doing that, then we should try to live together as, as a family or brothers. Yes, you may not agree again, and there must be a reason that split happened, but as long as, they can see that the objective, like you were saying, was to guidance and to, connect back to the Creator. If that is found and that is found, then I would say learn to live together. It takes a while. It's not easy. It takes many years sometimes, but it can be, unity can still be reached.
Is it very divisive where someone is saying, well, the way you're doing it violates the teachings of Jesus, and therefore you are not part of Methodist anymore. You are not one of us. I mean, is it risen to that level of saying, you're not legit, we are?
I think it depends on who you ask.
Because that's really a problem.
Probably different religions, different churches, this is going to look different. I guess one of the things that, for whatever reason, the different places I've worked, sometimes it's been easier to work with leaders or churches that weren't Roman Catholic, and we and that's not to, but why is that? I don't have an easy answer for that, but I think one of the things though is because it's an in-house argument, and there may be strong convictions about that. It's like my biological family and the argument that might happen there. But even bigger than that, because before I did this, I did spend some time as a hospital chaplain. And I think one of the things that happens and why it's so important to do this, because it helps us to work together, is because the focus becomes on the larger mission. I remember talking to pastors or religious leaders as a hospital chaplain, and if you have an issue on the ICU unit, that's pretty critical. In our churches, we might have an argument over whether chocolate or vanilla cake. We have these, but I think they come from sometimes we forget our mission. And if you have a mission of something that we're trying to do for our community, then I think my convictions are, as a pastor and working at the parish, I want to work with whoever is going to help us carry out that mission.
This reminds me of a personal experience that I had, and I hope it's meaningful. In one of my past lives, I was working in Africa, in Djibouti, in Ethiopia, and I came across a UN refugee camp as part of my efforts. And it was interesting because there were lots of people saying, we want to help all these refugees. Well, there were like 30,000 refugees in this camp. And there was only a handful of us. And I'm sitting there thinking, how do I help these people? What can I do in my own little way? And I just felt really impressed to just love them, because that's what they needed. They needed to know that they were loved. And so rather than, some people said, well, let's paint their little schoolhouse, or let's do something else. And somebody came up with the idea of, let's just get some soccer balls. And so we got some soccer balls, and we started playing soccer or football. And then all of a sudden, all the youth came out, and they were so excited to come around, and they were hugging, and they would jump on you, and and it was just loving them. And I think that's what we need to focus on, is how do we just love people? Because that's really the essence of what we're trying to accomplish here. And Mama, I really like what you had to say, that it doesn't matter who you worship, but it's about love. And that's what we try to do at JCCM, is serve everybody with mercy and grace and love them.
A quick thing.
Absolutely.
So within the Jewish world, we have our different denominations, but we have a subset that we sometimes struggle with, and that's sort of the Messianic Jewish community, where they believe that you can be Jewish and you can accept Jesus as the Messiah. We have respect for everybody's point of view, and I'm happy that people found something meaningful and it's connecting for them. But from a Jewish perspective, we would sort of see that path as what we might call Hebrew Christian. You are Christian, but you are following the Old Testament, and you're doing what Jesus did, which is practice Judaism. So that's okay. But there is that sort of gulf. You talked about that division. But and it's within actually my wife's family. There are some folks who believe that. We rarely talk about it, but there definitely is respect. It's like if you find something meaningful that connects you to God, that's not hurting anybody, that's, even if I philosophically disagree with it, then I respect it, and even though it's not my path. So.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to what you said, Mr. Lowry, and bring it to a little bit of the practical and what can we do individually. So here's a question that comes from my children, and it always challenges me, so I'm going to let you take a stab at it. What should you do when you see someone asking for money, food, or work at an intersection, parking lot, or street corner?
I'll take that, because we deal with that all the time. I've been doing this now for 4 years. Before that, I was a police officer and detective in San Jose, California. I am very familiar with the homeless issues that go along, and in my experience, people who are homeless are there because of one of several reasons. One of them is because their circumstances beyond their control. And COVID brought that to highlight, where both breadwinners in a family were laid off, and they had no way of taking care of themselves. And they would come to us and say, can you please help us sustain ourselves as we get out of this mess? And of course we could do that. So there are things that are out of people's control. Another major factor is addictions, where people become addicted to something, whatever it might be, and that occupies their soul, their mind, and all of their finances, and so they lose their job, they lose their ability to work. Another reason is a mental issue. A lot of people have mental issues that they can't deal with, and so they revert to doing whatever it is they can do that helps relieve that mental tension. Then there are people who choose to be homeless. Now, maybe some of you haven't seen this, but I have. And I have several that come into our JCCM on a regular basis, and I just say, how you doing? Well, where you been? Well, I've been in Ohio. I've been in Pennsylvania. But we always come back here when we need something. And I ask, why don't you get a house? You have income. Why don't you? I don't want to live in a house. 2 years ago, we had a client that had been homeless for a couple of decades, and we finally convinced that person and we got them an apartment to live in. And that person took the keys, gleefully went in, and came back the very next day and gave us the keys back and said, I can't live indoors. There are people, now you can say why, there's lots of reasons why they've come to that conclusion, but right now I probably have 10 or 12 people that I could just name right off the top of my head who are that way simply because they don't feel they belong inside of a house. They want to be outside. So all of those things combine into answering that question, which is there are people, and because I've experienced this, if you just wait in the parking lot and see some of these people, I have personally followed them just to see what happens, and I've seen people who have a permanent sign, and at the end of the day, they take all the money that they've got and they get in their car and they drive home to their house. That happens in our county. So that's one answer. Another answer is they could be any of those other three people that they're just lost.
Thank you. Again, it's a very, very good answer. Just to add to that, I think it's in Islam we support people being independent as opposed to just living off donations. Again, there could be many reasons why they're in that position, but just one incident that came to mind is once a companion or a person came to the Prophet Muhammad and he said, I need money. So the Prophet Muhammad said to him, wait here. He got him some money. He says, I want you to go buy some wood and some metal and bring it to me. So he did. He bought a piece of wood and he bought some metal. So the Prophet with his own hand shaped the wood, put the end of the axe on top of the wood, and he goes, now you go cut wood, earn money for yourself, don't beg, right? So to encourage people to be independent or support people to be independent, I think that's better than just giving money as and when people ask, because you're not treating the problem. You're not tackling the root of the problem. Tomorrow they'll still be there, the day after they'll still be there. So this is why projects like this, where helping the homeless and things like this, feeding, etc., helps people get on their feet and helps them to, fend for themselves. So I think there's a Chinese proverb which says, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, and teach him to fish, he'll be independent kind of thing. So this is kind of the philosophy that we encourage. So even myself, sometimes when I see people at the corner of the roads or things, I actually ask them, what's the reason you're here? Why you're here? Do you need anything? Or what is it that you actually need? And sometimes just to test them, I would say, meet me here at this time, if they're serious. Sometimes people do turn up, and there's a genuine reason. Sometimes they won't turn up. So he's like, okay, I did promise you to meet you to help you, but if you're not bothered to turn up, that kind of thing. But again, like you said, it's not very simple. There's many reasons they could be there, etc. So I've also met two people at least also that actually sold their houses, sold all their position, and they live out of a backpack, and it's something that they've chosen to do. So I've also met people like that as well, which is very strange to me when I first came across that. But yeah, there are people like that choose to be. So yeah.
I mean, generally, I would say I would offer food, and I've done that before. Can I help you? Can I pick something up for you? Or I will talk to sometimes about the resources of HARC and have some little flyers with me. I've done that a few times, and they'll take it and say thank you. My sense is they don't follow up sometimes, so I find myself torn seeing the signs and the sad faces, and then seeing a sign up behind them that says, please don't give them money, and I feel that conflict, and because I know sometimes you'll give money and it might be used for an illicit purpose, but in Judaism, I have to go back and look at it, but generally, you're supposed to sort of have faith that when you give that donation, it will be used for a positive purpose. But I prefer to give food and give help or support. But, what do you do? I've been involved a little bit with addiction folks and helped out in some of those centers and so forth. And even the recovering addicts will say that people have to want to make a change. They have to want it. That's the first step. And how do you get them to that first step? I don't know if anybody, it's hard.
And that's exactly what we do at the ministry. When somebody walks through the door, we wrap our arms around them. I call it full wraparound service to say, okay, what do you need to get yourself back on your feet? And so if somebody asks for money, we don't give them money, but we say we'll give you food, we'll give you clothing if you need it. But then we'll ask questions as well. So how is it you're here? Where do you have relatives around? It's somebody that can help you. And it's important because it gives people that ability. So, we have a job placement program where people will come in and say, I'm hungry, I need food. And we'll say, well, when was the last time you worked? And they say, well, it's been a decade since I worked. Well, we'll give them we'll give them a job, and we'll say, come in and work for us, and we'll give you a job, and it gives them self-confidence. It gets them back into expecting to not receive just something. But it goes back to what you were saying. If they say, nah, I don't want to work today, say, well, enjoy. Here's a loaf of bread so you're not hungry. Come back when you're ready to work.
Yeah, I thought of just listening to everything, but I guess something I would add, and Rabbi sort of alluded to it, maybe it's good it makes us uncomfortable, you know, and we're not always good at sitting with what's uncomfortable, but the fact that there are people that go hungry, like, yeah, it's good your children are sensitive to that. But also, people hear me say this, there is what can't we do. That's a reality. But I think we need to spend less time there in what can we do. Like I know we have a meal ministry in Shepherdstown for our homeless brothers and sisters. But so, because sometimes an issue will come up. I think of recently a situation of a Roman Catholic church in Georgetown gave me a situation of someone that really couldn't help and tried to put people together, and it was uncomfortable, you know, because I think that they were fleeing Guatemala. If they get picked up on the streets, or they're going to go back to a country where it was uncomfortable to think about this situation, but it was, I think, looking back, it was a good discomfort, because then we begin to get organized. And again, connecting with the Presbyterian Church and looking at what are resources, you know, who could be possible legal counsel. All those things kind of entered into the discussion, but if there was no discomfort, it wouldn't have happened. I'm very comfortable where I live, what I'm fed every day. So someone in my tradition who's a hero, who started what was known as the Catholic Worker, is Dorothy Day. And her famous line is, she comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comforted. So I think that's important to keep in mind with these issues.
I'll just quickly say that in Hagerstown, because of an organization called REACH, which really does a terrific job, it's true that you can always find a hot meal on a daily basis in Hagerstown. There are soup kitchens. I mean, yes, the hours and so forth, but you can always direct somebody to where they can find. Nobody should really go hungry in Hagerstown, from what I understand.
Yep, and again, with the Hagerstown, we have certain help that, you know, we've had refugees that have come. They don't have paperwork, they're illegal, etc. And we were just listening to some of the stories, you know, sometimes they're crossing borders from so many different countries, they're coming by sea, they're coming by boat, they're walking through so many different places, and they come and they have no place to stay, they don't have any paperwork. So we also have services for such people, you know, where they can turn up, where we have lawyers which will help them fill out the paperwork, which will file for them, which will get them a home for them and their family, try to get them some form of work or something to get them on their feet and stuff like that. So that's also important for people who may not actually be legal, and the reason of them being homeless is them being illegal. So we have to provide support for those sort of people as well.
That's the Refugee Support Network.
Yeah.
So that reminds me of our next question and a story. So a lot of churches and other faith traditions are really working to reach outside of the walls of their church, and this is true of the United Methodist Church as well. And one of the stories that I heard recently at our annual conference had to do with refugees coming into the United States. And there's a church in D.C. that is near Union Station. And they knew of a train that was coming in. It was, I think, the first Wednesday of every month or something like that, that had immigrants coming into the country. And they would meet that train at 5 o'clock in the morning with a hot meal, with shoes, with people to help them figure out what their next steps were and where to go from Union Station. So how do you motivate your communities to go outside the walls of your church or your mosque or your synagogue?
For the Islamic faith, at least the tradition, it's the motivation factor comes again because our faith is mainly based on the example of the Prophet Muhammad. And so there's many examples of the Prophet Muhammad where he went out of his way to help other people, people who are in need and things like this. And so he did, even socially, he made a lot of change in when he joined the community of Medina, which we started speaking about. So he brought change. For example, at that time, women had no rights, for example. So he started giving women social rights, which was unheard of at that time. So he encouraged women to be educated at that time. He gave women certain rights within the community. At that time in Arabia, women couldn't even say no to marriage. So if somebody, their father had decided or the brother had decided, it's like you're getting married, they didn't even have the right to say no. So he instilled certain rights within the women that, you know, you can say no, you have your own right, you're your own person. And then he taught the community this. So for us to encourage, go beyond the walls, etc. like this, it's easier because we can cite the example of the Prophet Muhammad in these sort of things. Charity was one of his fortes, you can say. He was very, very charitable. There's one narration which, when I read it, it really surprises me and impresses me, is that once they had some money come in, charity money come in from a place called Bahrain. And they say it was so much money that the mosque, they had to kick it aside with its feet just so they could stand and pray. There were so many coins, etc. And they say that he gave all of it away. He says, if anybody needs, come speak to me, I'll give you money, charity, charity. And so charity is something that he really encouraged. And so if there is anybody in need, regardless of the faith, and this is something he didn't look at, he would give to many people. And in fact, even in the Quran, it's mentioned, وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ, those people who are not of your faith, you still give them charity, encourage them, because he was concerned of the welfare and the well-being of other people. There's a story about how there was a young Jewish boy who used to come and assist the Prophet with certain tasks and things like this. And so when he fell ill, he would go and visit him, just like, because he's part of my community and things like this. And at times people would come to him and say, can you pray for us? And he would pray for them. At times other people would come and say, can you curse these people? So he would turn around and say, why curse them? Why not just pray for them? Instead of removing the problem, ask them so you're united. And so he really encouraged this sort of unity and helping each other even beyond the walls, etc., whatever problem somebody else is facing. So generally we tend to find that charitable activities within the Islamic religion are quite numerous, and they're very charitable. And we see this in Ramadan especially as well, that people are willing to give charity a lot. So in that sense, there's many examples. But and so within, for example, a masjid that we have a lot of doctors in our community, so we have a lot of free clinics that we have. And different days of the week, we have different experts, etc. So we have a gastrologist, we have a psychologist, we have, so he's here, his father's a specialist as well, ENT, for example. And so they offer their services to people who are not able to use the medical aid programs, etc. And so there's free clinics on certain days that are available. And so we have all of these services that we try to make available for anybody and everybody to come and use. Not like, you're only Muslim, so you come. No, anybody. It's a free day of clinic. Anybody come, get yourself seen, observe, etc. So we try to do whatever we can to help as many people as we can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we have our, I don't know about you guys, but we always have in any place I've been, any synagogue, you have your core group. So maybe there's 10, 11, 12 people, and they sort of do all the work, and they do all the volunteering. So we have volunteers who go to Reach and have stayed there overnight and done the shelter work. I played music for one of the winter shelters. Then around Christmas time, we have a whole core group that goes and volunteers over at the mall and helps wrap presents for and then takes donations for the American Red Cross. We have something called the Potter's Bowl coming up November 2nd. You know about that? November 3rd, where all these potters donate soup bowls and things that they've made. We all come and we eat and have fellowship, and money is raised for the community free clinic in Hagerstown. So that's is that something you know about, the Potter's Bowl? Yeah. So but again, it's typically your core group. Like, we really try to get the younger people involved, who to show them that being Jewish means you have to do what's called tikkun olam in Hebrew, which is healing of the world, to repair the world. So you try to get that message out, but typically people are busy and they're wrapped up in their own lives, and you just try to, one Jew at a time, get them involved.
I think it's a challenge across all congregations.
Yeah, I'm just learning, listening. Like, it's really impressive, like, listening to the imam. And, because I think in our churches sometimes not that this is a bad thing, but we do the charity step, but we could do a lot more with justice, and that's what I hear. But also, I think one of the, there's a saying sometimes in Christianity, they're so heavenly bound, they're no earthly good. And that's what Rabbi here, you know, like I'm always impressed at the work synagogues are doing in the now, you know, and I think that's where learning, like, yeah, what does this world mean? How are we trying to save it and help it is really important. But like as a Roman Catholic, the Eucharist, that's really an essential thing. Really the heart, like very important, one of the most important to us is the Eucharist we celebrate. But, you know, like this past weekend, and I shared this in the homily, there's part of the prayer that's part of the actually consecration of the bread and wine that we believe become the body and blood of Christ. But in the prayer, I said in it, I may not have the lines totally correct, but that your church would stand for truth, justice, freedom, and I'm forgetting the last one. Truth, justice, freedom, and that all people may be raised up to a new hope. But, you know, you think of what that means. Like, have we arrived there? My church, you know, condemned, was against Galileo. There's truth to still be learned. He was right. I was in a seminary that at one time owned slaves. Freedom, have we arrived at freedom? So these things of, but it's interesting that a prayer that is so, you know, maybe would say Roman Catholic, has us look out at the large culture. And how am I working with people of all different backgrounds? I'm living out my faith as I'm promoting truth, justice, freedom, equality, that all people may be raised up to a new hope. So in my tradition, there's the law of prayer leads to action. So I think that's important, or sometimes we say orthodoxy, belief, leads to orthopraxy, the practice. And I think we've got to find ways to make that connection so people see that what we do there on Sunday, which is only going to be about an hour of a week. And most of the rest of the week, most of us are going to be spending most of our time with people that are not Catholic. So how are we working together with the common mission of truth, justice, freedom, equality, that all people may be raised up to new hope?
You know, it's interesting. I've said that there are two things I wanted to touch on. The first one is that I already spoke about it. We don't ask questions of anybody. We don't want to know anything about them other than, if you're hurting, how can we help you? But the second thing is that we've come to realize that you can't do this all within one organization, because everybody has different strengths. And I'm happy to hear that, you know, you have physicians and doctors who are coming in. We have over 70 different partners that we work with throughout the Panhandle and throughout the state, that if we have a need, then we can call that person and say, we need you now, or can you help us with this aspect of what we're trying to accomplish? And I think that's where the success comes in, not trying to do it all yourself, but broadening, as I think, Father, you were talking about, broadening the tent, saying, how can we accomplish the goal of saving this sheep who's lost? And how do we best go about doing that? And I think that's what we do with our mission.
Thank you. So our final question for tonight really gives you the opportunity to share, if you had one dream project that you wish that your communities of faith would come together to accomplish, what would that be?
We've been working for the past 2 years to build a permanent emergency shelter for adults, a permanent emergency shelter for families with children. And for those that don't know, if you have a child under the age of 16 or 12 or 14, there's no place to go in our Panhandle. you have to be either an adult or you can't have a child, and to build a clinic that's a free clinic. And this last year, we were granted that money from Congress. And so we're in the process of doing all those things. And my big wish is that money has to be filtered through a government agency. And I've lost all my hair trying to deal with that government agency because they won't let the money go. So if I could do anything, it would be to try to influence that government agency to let my people go. Give us the money so that we can do these things, because I have homeless people and I have needs now. I don't need it in 2 years from now. So that's my biggest thing.
Thank you.
What I've heard we need in Hagerstown that I wish I could get my people around, and if we had some of the big pockets that some synagogues have, something like a halfway house where people could come and live and have shelter, who were trying to transition out of drugs, out of homelessness, have some support, be able to stay there for a while as they look for work, get drug treatment, get psychotherapy and so forth, because I've heard that's, I forget who told me, but that's something they would really need in Hagerstown, and I wish we had the resources. I mean, we could start talking about it with Hark, but if we could really be a pioneer in that effort as a dream, that certainly would be a dream.
Wonderful.
It's really got me thinking, actually. It's a very deep question, because there is a lot of need in the community, and like you said, one organization is not enough to do everything. Ideally, you want an organization that branches out into different aspects, and you will have different sort of goals and objectives underneath it, and it specializes in different areas and things like this. So ideally, you want to start an organization which is, again, well-funded, etc., that can deal with the problems of each community, and each community has different problems. We were speaking before about drugs addiction and how it's affected the people, although it was 20 or 30 years ago, but it's still affecting people today and their lives and things like this. So the need of every community changes with time. Sometimes you have homelessness, sometimes you have drug addictions, and it depends who's the next generation coming and what happens. So an organization that is well equipped to deal with all sorts of problems within the community would be like an ideal project to work for,
Thank you.
So I'm looking out at the Episcopal pastor, the Presbyterian pastor, and the Lutheran pastor. And Karen, the Lutheran pastor, is in charge of the Ministerial Association. So maybe it's a discussion question for our next agenda. But I'll take a hit. One thing I would say that I had been thinking a little bit about this, and we're already doing this, but I think we could do more of it, is it's like peace and justice in each of our churches. We're very convicted about that, and we do. I think we could even do more to partner with each other, that because you have more gifts and more resources. So that would be one thing. The second thing I think is I hope tonight is just a start. I think we really need to branch out more interreligiously. So I was talking to the rabbi and the imam about how do we, connect more with the synagogue and the mosque, and how do we support that in our community as well. So that would be some things I think that would be good goals.
Thank you, and thank you for your participation tonight and for being willing to sit in front of an audience and tackle some tough questions that have really challenged our community and our faith leaders for hundreds of years. And tonight is just another step in having those conversations together.
Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So as we conclude, I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the Shepherdstown Ministerial Association, who chose to partner with the Stubblefield Institute on this event. And we have explored tonight the importance of community, how despite our differences, we can come together to support one another. Our discussions have highlighted the power of collaboration across faith traditions. We've seen that with Jefferson County Community Ministries. It's demonstrated that even though sometimes our world seems divided, our local communities still have the capacity for understanding, compassion, and solidarity when it comes to meeting the needs of our neighbors. And so as we move forward, I hope that you will carry this dialogue with you. I hope you will think about how we can be a stronger, more united community. And so if you're interested in joining in other events being hosted by the Shepherdstown Ministerial Association, if you've not already received a handout, there are handouts available in the lobby. A list of the events are also available on our website, stubblefieldinstitute.org. And this week of prayer and worship will be closed out on November 12th, which is actually 2 weeks away. And it will close out with an affirmation of community in which we'll come together to commit to being in a community with one another, regardless of the outcome of the election. That event will be held at 7 p.m. at the War Memorial Building on German Street. Later that week, on November 14th, the Stubblefield Institute will be hosting our next community engagement conversation titled, How is West Virginia First Keeping West Virginia First? The leadership of the West Virginia First Foundation, which has been tasked with distributing the opioid settlement funds, will be joined by the General Counsel from the West Virginia Attorney General's Office and Dr. Stephen Lloyd, who is the Director of the West Virginia Office for Drug Control Policy, and the inspiration behind the Hulu series Dope Sick. They will engage in a conversation about how West Virginia First ensures that funds received are effectively used to address the state's opioid crisis, and how to avoid the criticisms leveled at how West Virginia handled the funds received during the tobacco settlement of the 1990s. This event will happen on November 14th at 5:30 p.m. at the Bird Health Sciences Center, another bird building, but not here at Shepherd, at Berkeley Medical Center in Martinsburg. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. If you haven't already, make sure you vote, and let's continue to prioritize community over politics in our daily lives. Thank you.